Hey guys, it's Tiny Tom Logan back with another video for you. And today we're going to be reviewing the 4960X, which is obviously commonly known or codenamed or however you want to put it, Ivy Bridge Extreme, and it's obviously our newer version of the 2011 socket CPUs based around and on the X79 chipset. But one thing I need to do is we're going to be doing this review slightly differently today. It's going to be very much a verbal review. Because if I start to talk to you about the specifications and stuff, that's going to be so easy for me to start slipping into my thoughts on them and it becoming a conclusion. So we're going to kind of lump it all in together. You do need to click wherever the link is because I can never remember whether is it left or right. I'm going to have to look and then try and remember, and then like right on my hand or something. This is where the click link is. But I think it's this side. I think it's this side. He's saying yes. So right, they're all like, who's he? Jordan's here watching. Anyway, right. So yeah, so we're going to do this slightly differently today, and it's all going to be quite verbal. So if you want to kind of follow what I'm saying as we go through this, make sure you go and take a look at the main review on Overclock 3D, where you can see all the comparisons and all the graphs and stuff. And then I will explain things my way here, and I've taken quite a few notes because there is a shitload of stuff that I do need to get across. And it's easier for me to just structure it like this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to say performance award, but then also what I'm going to say is yes, it's got an award, but you do need to listen to my thoughts on this because you have to take it from a very kind of specific sort of angle to be able to see why it got the performance award, because there are a lot of positives with the CPU, but at the same time it's intended for a very specific use. And in that way, if you looked at it from a different perspective, you'd struggle to give it a bronze award. So that's why we need to get down and dirty with me having a good chit chat with you, letting you know all the ins and outs of a duck's bum about my, the specs with it, all the, architecture changes, and well, not architecture so much, but all the changes for the die shrink and everything like that. And we'll move on through. So if you haven't done already, if you really are interested in this and you're looking at spending a lot of money on this, what I would suggest you do is pause the video, go and make yourself a cup of tea, get yourself some biscuits, get an extra comfy cushion and sit down and get comfy, and I'll walk you through this. And by the end of this video, you should know whether you want to be spending over $900, which is probably going to end up being about £900 as well, on this or not. So there we go. So right, we'll start from the top. It's essentially just, if you remember the Sandy Bridge, the Ivy Bridge change that we had, it's pretty much the same. And Intel do this thing called tick-tock, and the tock is the big, architecture change where we got like Sandy Bridge and Sandy Bridge Extreme in the first place, and then you move on to the tick, which is like the smaller kind of revision. And then what they do, they essentially do a die shrink, and then they kind of nail other stuff around to take up more room on the CPU die. So what they've essentially done, Sandy Bridge Extreme was 6 cores, 12 threads, but it was 32 nanometer. And I need to remember to say nanometer, not Newton meter, because I always end up going off on a torque wrench. It's the engineer in me. But Ivy Bridge E is still 6 cores, 12 threads, so we've got nothing extra in that respect, but they have shrunk it down to a 22 nanometer process. Other things that they've brought to the table just quickly, really essentially are lower power usage, and it has now finally got PCI Express 3. The boards have always had PCI Express 3 and a PCI Express 3 ready, but the CPUs weren't there to be able to utilize all that. So what we need to do, 32 nanometer, that was a 435 millimeter squared die, and essentially what they've done with a 22 nanometer is brought that down to a 257 millimeter squared die, so it's almost half the size. That has alleviated a lot more space, I want to say on the die again, but on the silicon or whatever you want to call it, on the CPU, to be able to bring in other stuff. Now it is kind of confusing that they've almost halved it, yet they've not really added much more on. We have got a shitload of PCI Express lanes. There's now 40 to be utilised, which is fucking monumental, to be fair. And not only are is there 40 lanes there, there's also obviously now 40 PCI Express 3 lanes there, which means the bandwidth has gone just northbound. It's ridiculous. One thing I will say though with this is the way that the PCI Express is laid out. You can either have 2 times 16 and then 1 times 8, so if you want to go 3, or you can have 1 times 16 and then 3 times 8. And then if you go down even further, you could say you could have 1 times 16, 2 times 8, and then 2 times 4. And then people are going to start thinking to themselves, hang on a minute, we can only run 4 graphics cards at once. But this is then when it does start to get kind of confusing as to really the place that this is being aimed at in the first place. And I'll say from the get-go, unless you are running more than 2 graphics cards, or you're going to be running a lot of graphics cards, excuse me, and then you're going to be needing to use bandwidth hungry PCI Express stuff at the same time. So for argument's sake, say you are a professional renderer, whether it's video, 3D rendering, photo rendering, anything that's going to, you know, essentially use all of the cores and threads on the CPU. And then you could possibly be thinking to yourself, oh, you've got some Teslas in there, or the Fire X Pros, whatever the AMD versions are. And then you could quite possibly have a RAID card on there as well, fill up the solid state drives, because you want to keep everything super, super quick. That's the kind of point that all of those PCI Express lanes start to make sense. If that's the kind of professional angle. If you're a mentalist gamer that has more money than sense, and you're running 3 or 4, say for argument's sake, 780s, that is the only other time where this kind of does start to make sense, because you're not really going to be wanting to run 3 or 4 on Haswell. Not saying that you're going to be hitting bottlenecks or anything like that, but just because the PCI Express lanes are going to start to get limited, and obviously you can get delays with the PLX chips and the stuff. But like I said, it really comes down to what you're rendering with, to be fair. If you need a lot of CPU grunt, as well as the GPU grunt, you're obviously going to be here. If your rendering program is pretty much all going to be CUDA, or what's the I can never remember, I think it's OpenCL is the AMD version. If it's all going to be GPU based stuff, then you could get away with the Haswell. But again, we're going to end up getting massively confused here. So what we found, the CPU out the box is 3.6 gigahertz. I've not said this yet, but it turbos up to 4 gigahertz, which is what it says on the box. One thing I will say is people are going to be like, right, I bought one, it's running, I'm loading it up, and I'm only getting 3.7 gigahertz. What's going on? Well, the thing you kind of need to remember is that the cores are set up depending how many cores are loaded depends on the frequency that you get. If you've just got 1 core loaded, you will get that 4 gigahertz. If you load all 6 up, like we have done with OCCT, then you're only going to get 3.7. But just to make things even more complicated, I've actually seen this CPU at stock, and CPU-Z has been flashing up at 4.1 and 4.2 gigahertz. So whether that's some BIOS Fandango that Asus has done with the Rampage 4 Extreme, or whether that is just something that the CPU just seems to, you know, go up to when it's happy, and it's kind of almost overclocking itself beyond the normal turbo speed, I don't know, but that's something that I have seen. When we talk about OCCT, one thing that I will say is the temperatures that I've seen with the Ivy Bridge Extreme have been a lot lower than I've been expecting. Around the 4.5 gigahertz overclock mark, you know, at decent volts, which has been around 1.3, it's been significant. It's been about 50 watts lower than the 3960X, and just CPU loading. So OCCT, we have it in AVX compatible mode, 90% free memory, basically making your rig hang out of its arse. We've been getting 262 watts on the 3960X, and then 212 watts on the 4960X. Now that's stock. If you wham the overclocks up, if we go overclocks, we'll say 4.6 gigahertz. On this, as I'll explain in a minute, the overclocks aren't brilliant at 1.425 volts. The same volts on the 3960X is 4.75 gigahertz, but you've lost again another 50 watts there. You're looking at 408 watts max load for Sandy Bridge E. If you go to Ivy Bridge E, it drops down to 356. So that's a 52 watt difference, which is pretty substantial really when you think about it. Now the overclocking, as I've kind of said before, with the original 3960X that I got sent, that we tested on the Rampage Extreme, we got 4.75 gigahertz out of it. It is a smidge over 1.4 volts. The Ivy Bridge, which is obviously the 4960X, I'm going to get these numbers confused eventually, that at 1.425 volts, I just about got to run at 4.6 gigahertz. Now the temperatures weren't really a problem on the H100, running with quiet fans in a room that was around 21, 22 degrees. I was getting up to about 80 degrees. If the room started to warm up even further, which especially when we're running GPU benches and stuff like that, obviously the temps went up, but around and about 80 degrees. Which is pretty good when you consider if you put those kind of volts in Haswell, it would probably just have a hissy fit and melt the polar ice caps. So the temperatures were much better and a lot lower than I was expecting at those kind of voltages. But the thing is I was actually really surprised I needed those kind of volts for such a lower clock in the first place. And it was a big difference. If we went down to 4.5 gigahertz, it was 1.325 volts. So there was an enormous leap up from 4.5 to 4.6. I would almost go as far as to say if this was my chip that I had just bought, I would be running the 4.5 gigahertz for the extra that it got you. Now, I will say, if you're going to have a look at the benchmarks and stuff, this is where it starts to get really confusing, because clock for clock, the Ivy Bridge E is quicker. So we've got the 3960X running at 4.75 gigahertz, and we've got the 3960X running at 4.75 gigahertz, and we've got the 4960X running at 4.6. And pretty much in every single benchmark we run, they were almost exactly the same. To the point where, like Cinebench, which is one of the best programs you can get for testing your cores and essentially like loading everything up, like Cinebench loves Xeons and all the cores and threads, and it's a rendering program basically, but it's a wicked benchmark. The newer Ivy Bridge E was 1 point behind. It was 13.91 for the Ivy Bridge E and 13.92 for the Sandy Bridge E. So there's literally hardly anything to kind of separate them. But we've got lower power consumption. That's a positive. So it's as quick, but it uses less power and at a lower clock. So it's disappointing as an overclocking CPU, but once you do get it up to its kind of limits as clocking, it's going to be quicker or as quick as one of the old Sandy Bridge Extremes with a big overclock on it. So you've kind of got, there's a good in this hand, and then you can take it away with kind of some mediocre overclocking. Something else that I will say is better about it is with the older Sandy Bridge, I kind of run my benchmarks with the memory set to 2133. Pretty much every one of the CPUs that I've had, and believe me, I have been through a lot of them, that was about the limit. I think I got 2200 megahertz at one point, and that was with memory that was rated at 24. There was no problems with the memory. It's just the memory controllers on the original Sandy Bridge E's were a bit weak. There was very few out there that you could get that 2400 out of, with either that none of them would do it easily, but some of them would get there if you knew what you were doing with all the different voltages and stuff. Now I know my way through the 2011 BIOS like the back of my hand, and even with my original ones, the 3930Ks and the 3960Xs, none of them would get anywhere. 2200 was the absolute limits with ridiculous volts and stuff. 3970X I've got was a little bit different. That one would do 2400 with voltage tweaks. Fairly easy ones as well, but I did get that up to 2550. The 4960X will do 2400 out the box. All you need to do is go into your memory settings, set your memory timings up as it says on the packet or the side of your RAM, you know, what the settings are, or you can run XMP if you want, and then set the actual memory voltage as well. And I got mine literally to go smack bang straight in at 2400, and I did all of my overclocking with the memory running at 2400 as well. So in that respect, it's better. But then when you kind of, if you wanted to take it up a notch and you want to kind of push past that really easy point, the maximum that I managed to get was 2600 on the memory. And the other thing with the overclocking on this, the 4.6 gigahertz that I got, that was just with a multiplier change. But what Intel have done is they've said that this K series unlocked CPU is their, you know, their most beastly overclocker yet, and you can now overclock the base clock again. And to be fair, you can do. But if anyone out there knows about changing the base clock, you'll also know that it changes your memory timing. So if you start playing around with this, always keep an eye on that memory timing, because just a few megahertz on the base clock can make an amazing difference on the memory timing, depending on the multiplier that you're running, or the strap, or whatever you want to call it, that you're running on the memory on. So go careful with that, because you may think your CPU's unstable, but it's actually because your memory's running out of spec. So go careful. But if you, the way when we test our base clock ability, what we do is we turn our memory right down low. We drop the multiplier on the CPU down to 12, so we're literally taking all the stress off of the you know, off the CPU, and then we just start working on the base clock, moving it up. And I managed to get 141 on the base clock, which is, it's a fairly, you know, monumental step forward. When you're thinking Haswell, Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, you were lucky to get 1.03, 1.04, so 103 or 104 out of that if you were lucky. Obviously they all go up in tenths of a megahertz, but this is, you're looking at kind of, oh well, we managed to get about 140. And when we did our 2600 megahertz, what we essentially did is set the memory up on a 2400 strap, and then I'm pretty sure it went up to, I think it was about 108 or something on the multiplier, and that got us up to that 2600 mark. So if you're looking for something to really kind of fiddle and play with your memory, then this is going to be, it will be something that you'll be able to definitely get more involved in. But the problem is you'll be needing to start on a memory kit that's slightly lower, because you're going to hit the limits of the internal memory controller, or the IMC. You know, but if you had a 2400 megahertz kit, for argument's sake, you might find it would go further on Haswell, because you would have, Haswell's obviously got a much stronger memory controller and can go, you know, can ramp up a lot quicker. So it's kind of, again, it's a trade-off. It's better, but you know, if you're really going to be wanting to push memory and stuff, you're probably not going to be buying a 1600 kit and trying to get 1866 or 2133 out of it, because by the time you've kind of bought this CPU in the first place, you're going to be looking at buying a 2133 or a 2400 kit as kind of a basis. And I would almost say for the majority of people out there, buying a 2400 megahertz kit is probably what you want to do, and then maybe see how much further you can tweak past it, but don't lose any sleep over it if you can't. The memory timing's so much on Sandy Bridge, Ivy Bridge, Haswell, and the extreme versions. Memory timings doesn't really matter so much. These CPUs and the way the architecture works now, they love bandwidth, which is the actual 2133 or 2400 bit. The timings don't matter as much as they used to. So like before, we'd have kits that were doing 6, 8, 6, 24, and we were like, oh yeah, they're amazing because they're so fast. And they were on the X58 or 1366 sockets. That CPU loved tight timings, and that's what we would call speed. These newer ones, they like bandwidth. They just want as much memory bandwidth as possible to just throw all this shit down like a massive tunnel. and it's more about getting as much shit as possible down the tunnel than how quick you push it through. Is the only way I can try and explain it. And even he's smiling at me now because of the tunnel and shit kind of thing. But that's how it works nowadays. It's not as quick as it can get it down there. It just wants to put fucking loads of it down there, and it doesn't really matter how fast it goes. So with this, that is what I've always said with Sandy, Ivy and all that kind of stuff, is if you're not really worried about, you know, trying to tweak past something just for shits and giggles, I've always said buy the memory speed you can afford. And with this, definitely it's the same thing. Buy the memory speed that you can afford. If you want to tweak, have a bit of fun, but don't lose any sleep if you can't push past it, because I'm fed up when I kind of see people buying 1600 megahertz kits and then moaning they can't get it to 2133. There's big gaps in between these now, peeps. So it's just one of those things where you just kind of try and get the best that you can. So overclocking, bit limited, but it is as quick, you know, as an even higher clocked Sandy Bridge Extreme, which is kind of, you have got that kind of trade-off there. Now with games, we only run a couple of games tests with this, and to be fair, we only really needed to as well, because and it's something that I'm going to cover in a later review, is you don't need a CPU like this to run a graphics card or two. There's no worries with bottlenecks and stuff like that. There's very few games that will actually use more of the CPU in the processing of the game than your GPU of the game. Now everything's pretty much massively aimed at, you know, just loading up that graphics card as much as possible. You don't have to worry about bottlenecks and stuff like that. And something that I will show you in a later date is that the CPU, it doesn't really play, you know, as much a bigger part as it used to, as much as it used to before. To the point where you're going to get very, very similar frames per second with, say you had this rig, and then you move the same graphics card, the same RAM, the same solid state drive, all that kind of stuff over to a 4770K or even a 4670K, there wouldn't be that much of a, you know, an enormous increase in frames per second between that lot, which is one of the reasons why we've been saying for a long time, spend more money on your graphics. Make sure you have an epic graphics card, because if you're just going to be playing games, then having an i5 compared to an i7 1150 and a 780, you're not really going to get a lot of difference out of it, apart from that one odd game that will rely on the CPU more. It's got nothing to do with bottlenecking anymore. So essentially, yeah, it is a complicated one. On one hand, it's a bit kind of, I wanted the overclocking to be better, because if this was running at 4.8 gigahertz, for example, it would be significantly quicker by a long margin than the old Sandy Bridge E stuff. Like if we were, you know, benching them at the same clocks, then we'd be telling a completely different story. But it does feel, trying to overclock this did frustrate me a lot, and to the point where I have got two CPUs and this is the better of them. So just to kind of put that out there, that, you know, we've gone with the best case scenario with this one. The other one I couldn't get running stable beyond 4.5 gigahertz, just to kind of put that out there. So that's why we give it the performance award, but it's very much for EPeen boys. It's very much for professional renderers, coders, editors, that type of thing, that are going to use this CPU horsepower or need all those PCI Express lanes. This isn't something for gamers. Despite what Intel say, I'm kind of the opinion I wouldn't say this is particularly going to be that much fun for overclockers either. If you want to learn about like balancing the base clocks and stuff like that, then, you know, fair enough. But to be fair with your peeps, it's going to be an expensive learning exercise. It really is. You've got to really want this, to want to pay for it. One thing I would say is, if you're going to be a gamer, stay with Haswell. Unless you're going more than 2 graphics cards, Haswell is fucking epic for what you want. You really don't realise how good that is as a gaming platform. If you're obviously, if you're I'm completely losing my train of thought here. I've just seen a fucking great bird fly past the window and it's put me right off. So yeah, if you're just as a gamer, it's not going to be for you. It's really not going to be worth the money. It's not going to be worth the outlay. If you've already got 2011 now, and you're seeing this as an upgrade path to go from Sandy Bridge Extreme to Ivy Bridge Extreme, I would also say if you've got a CPU that overclocks quite well already, so goes past 4.6 gigahertz for argument's sake, then I wouldn't bother changing. If you've got one like I've got, which will do, I mean, the results that we got on this is 4.75, but I've now got another 3960X which does 4.8. I've got, because the results that we used were part of the very, very original review when we first got the Rampage Extreme out, 4 Extreme out of box. I've now got a slightly better CPU. I've also got the 4970. If you've got one of those, my one does 4.8 without really breaking a sweat, but I can get it running 5 gigahertz with 2400 megahertz memory as well. If you've got something like that, then stay put, because you've actually got a faster processor. The only reason why I would say if you've got 2011 and you need to jump forward is if you need the PCI Express 3, all those extra the extra bandwidth that's going to bring with it. So if you've got a huge RAID array and 3 cards or whatever, then you will see a performance boost if you're using it professionally. But again, it's going to be an expensive upgrade path for you. Something else that I do need to say quite urgently as well, I should have said this at the beginning, on a lot of the boards that are available now, so if you've already got one or you buy a second-hand one, you actually you need to update the BIOS before you put the new Ivy Bridge Extreme CPU in. If you don't, it won't start. And I mean that, it won't start either. If you've got an Asus board, then you can use the flash BIOS, where you can do it without any power on and everything like that, and you can still flash the BIOS. Sorry, you can do it without a CPU and memory in if you have to. You do need power. But you can flash the BIOS from a USB stick, like I said, whether the CPU's in there or not. But with some of the other boards, and this is something that a lot of the people in the channel are kind of like scratching their heads about at the moment, is all the boards that are out there at the moment now need the newer BIOS on, so these will work. Otherwise, if you buy an older board with the newer CPU, it won't start. You'll get 00 on the your PCI loader at the top. It will be like there's not a CPU in there at all. So you do need to go careful with that. The channel people will probably get that sorted fairly quickly, but if you're buying a board off of eBay, for example, or a mate, or whatever, please make sure it's got the very latest BIOS on it, so it does support Sandy Bridge Extreme out of box. If it's an Asus board, like I said, you don't need to worry, because you can do the BIOS flash thing with a USB drive and you don't even have to turn it on, and that'll be alright. So yes, I've said so much. How long have we been recording for? 27 minutes, and it's been one massive long take as well. So yeah, this is very, very specific for the people that are out there. I'm obviously going to keep benching my GPUs on a 3960X, because there's really no point in me going across, and I now need to work out whether I'm going to use the new one for the newer boards or not. Still, again, I really don't know yet. So yeah, that's pretty much it. One thing I will say though, and I'll need to post the link underneath, is would you like to win a GTX 780 possibly? Because live on the website until the end of September, because this video is going to go live tomorrow, but I'm putting the competition live tonight just to confuse you. Till the end of September, there is a treasure hunt on my website, so you can go there and have a look. I'll stick a link underneath if you fancy a chance of being in with, if you fancy winning a GTX 780. So yeah, and it's right at the end of the video. I should have said it at the beginning, but anyway. Right, so I pretty much think we've covered everything. We've covered everything, I think. So yeah, I know there are going to be a lot of people out there that are going to be disappointed, because they were going to expect this to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. I'm completely with you on this, but I did have to take kind of a step back from making it not personal and look at it from a professional standpoint, and kind of look at, for the market this is aimed at, there's it is bloody good for the market it's aimed at. And if you're, like I said, if you've got to have the best, then you can't get better than this at this present moment in time. But just to kind of explain another little thing behind the backgrounds of this to you, in the whole of the UK market, I don't know stats for the States and stuff, Haswell sells 40 to 45% of the total market share. That's Haswell. Just to show you the difference, 2011 is 5% of that. So the actual, you know, market share that all of these boards and CPUs have is fucking tiny. And I happen to know that the Gigabyte have got some old, I don't think it's the 890FX boards, it's an old AMD board basically, or an old AMD chipset. That segment of their sales actually accounts for 15% of their market sales. So Gigabyte 2011 and the old 3-year-old AMD stuff, the old 3-year-old AMD stuff sells 3 to 1 more than the 2011 stuff. Now I know there's a lot of price differences and stuff like that, and this is probably because of, you know, crappy Office and OEM and fucking whatever else PCs that we don't particularly want to know about. But this is just to kind of give you an idea about the difference in sales that all of the vendors are going to be getting from these, as well as Intel, from these up to, you know, even from Haswell and from those old AMD. So it's a very, very niche market, which is pretty much why Intel have aimed this at the people with massive wallets that don't particularly care how much shit costs, and they just want, you know, the best that they can do at the moment. And as far as performance is concerned, with anything that AMD have got to do, because to be fair, that 5 gigahertz thing that they released was a fucking shambles. It was just ridiculous, which is why they've now dropped the price by about 80%, because they just couldn't get rid of them. No one was stupid enough to buy them. The Intel stuff, I mean, let's think about it. The AMD dropped the prices because this thing was coming, and it's going to be like twice as fast. It ridiculously quicker. So yeah, for people that have got to have the absolute best, it's all right. But Intel know that their main market for, you know, most enthusiasts, pretty much every gamer on the planet that, you know, wants a decent rig, Haswell is where you need to be going. So just kind of bear that in mind. If you were looking to upgrade from Haswell to this, really not a lot of point in, you know, without what I said about, you know, multiple graphics cards and fucking massive RAID cards and stuff like that. But you need such a big wallet. You're probably not going to give a shit about anything I say in this review anyway. You're just going to be going to get the best possible thing that you could do. So I apologise, it's all been my face. I apologise, it's all been me talking, because even I've now got a dry throat and need a drink of water. But I'm kind of hoping I've covered all the bases for you, and maybe talk to you about some other stuff that you wouldn't have heard in other reviews anyway. But like I said before, make sure you click to the review link. In fact, I might have to move the review link, because I've just remembered that we're going to have an award over here, so maybe I'll have to move the award up or something. So yeah, click the review link, go and have a look at all the graphs, the power, the games, the benchmarks, everything's all in there, and a lovely big fat written conclusion at the end. I'd actually like it if someone actually bothered to read those things. But anyway, go and take a look at that. While you're on the website, don't forget to look for the 780 competition, because you don't really want to, you know, lose a chance of winning a brand new Gigabyte GTX 780 overclock, do you? And I've got the box up there, but anyway, I can't be bothered to get it. But yeah, that competition is going to be live by the time this video is, so go and look for that as well. But for now at least, it's been a lot of talking. I need some water or another cup of tea, I don't fucking know. Anyway, this is Tiny Tom Logan with another video for you. Out.